so last week we started this series called Into the Unknown. That is in no way related to the song from a certain Disney cartoon, which I definitely was not singing all morning as I was trying to prepare for this. And no, we don't say that word. And so we've been talking about all of life's different unknowns and changes. And by the way, did anybody change their mind in our game a minute ago? Did anybody's opinions change? Like, nobody converted from, like, Marvel to DC? Nobody? How many of you were on board with the crunchy peanut butter thing? How many of you are like, no, creamy is definitely better? Okay? So nobody changed their mind on any unpopular opinions. Okay. How about, let me ask you this. Have you ever tried to make a change in your life because you thought it would make your life better? Like, maybe someone couldn't convince you that DC is better than Marvel. It's a tough task. But maybe you've tried to make some changes in your life that would make your life better. I think we all have. We all have different drives and different goals and aspirations in our life, and we want our lives to be better in certain areas, and that means we have to try to change things to be better. A few years ago, when Chelsea was pregnant with our first kid, Zeke, we watched a documentary on Netflix called What the Health. You guys seen this documentary? It's all about plant-based diets. And so she and I went for 8 months on a plant-based diet. Probably more like 6 because I didn't really stick to it as well as she did. She did really good, let's be honest. Anytime I had a church event or whatever, I was like, real food, no, even though it's probably less real food. But I like pizza with pineapple on it. So anyway, so we tried eating plant-based for a while for different health reasons. I wanted to stop gaining weight, and she wanted to try to fix some hormone imbalances that she was dealing with, and so we tried going plant-based for a while, and let me tell you something, it was really hard. You come up with some creative ways. One of my favorite foods on the planet is nachos. And anybody? Nachos? Like, no joke, when Taco Bell had their, like, nacho box a while ago, I probably had 20 of those in, like, a 2-week time period. It would get to be, like, 10 o'clock at night, and it'd be like, I want nachos. And I'd go to Taco Bell, come back, and that's pretty much, I like nachos a lot. So, when you're plant-based, you know what you can't have? Dairy. You know what nachos are made of? A lot of dairy. So, there's this thing called nutritional yeast, which is a type of ingredient that you use to make fake cheese. It's plant-based and not dairy. So, I tried all kinds of recipes to make, in fact, the best one I had was not one I made. It was at a place that's no longer open in Greenwood called Hops and Fire. Anybody ever been? Yeah, Hops and Fire on 135 in Greenwood. I'm really sad. It closed. But they had these vegan nachos. And it was like made with this nutritional yeast, and it was runny, just like normal cheese is supposed to be. And oh, it was so good. So I kept trying to make that at home, and I couldn't, and it was really hard. All that to say, making changes in your life are really hard. And honestly, it's why many of us don't stick to it. It's why we give up at times. Maybe for you, it's school. You know that you need to improve your grades a little bit better, but making the change to study an extra 15 minutes every night is a lot when you could be playing Among Us, right? And so changes are hard. Maybe it's not school. Maybe it's getting more serious about practice. You don't want to let your team down. You don't want to let whatever it is, whether it's band or soccer or drama or whatever it is, you have a group of people that you are committed to when you commit to being a part of that team or club or whatever. And so you want to take it more seriously. Or maybe you want to make a change in your friend group. You know that the people you're hanging around probably aren't the best influences on your life, and you need to make a change, but you've known these people forever, and to switch friend groups and try to make new friends is kind of a scary thing. And what if other people reject you? What if it doesn't come very easily or naturally? Or maybe you've developed some habits that you know just are not healthy for you. Maybe it's something that everyone gives you a hard time about, like my mom and her Diet Coke that she drinks way too much of, and we all love her and give her an incredibly hard time with. Or maybe it's something nobody knows, and you keep this secret, and you nurture this secret, and it's growing, and you know that you need to kind of let some bad habits go. But making the change to make that happen is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly tough to make the change. And actually making the change that we need to make is really hard to do. So many of us don't do it. Making changes is difficult. It's not as easy as you just changing your mind about something. It's changing your lifestyle. It's changing your habits. It's changing the way you structure your schedule. Making changes in life is really hard. And many reasons that it is hard is because many of us have various reasons we don't want to do it. Maybe it's we're afraid to fail. We don't want to try something and then not succeed, and then we feel like, well, I should have just stuck to what I know. Or maybe you just don't want to seem different. You don't want to stand out. Or you don't want to draw attention to yourself by making a change. You don't want to start doing things differently because then people are going to ask you questions and then you're going to have to explain everything and you don't want to do that. So maybe you just don't do that. Or maybe you just are worried what other people will think when it comes to that. Maybe it's, and this is probably most likely, it just seems really overwhelming. Changes are really hard to do. You don't have the willpower to do it all on your own. And maybe you've tried and you have failed before, and so that just reinforces your lack of confidence about trying again. And so making changes is hard for all these different reasons, even though there's all these different kinds of changes that we want to make. So today I want to read to you from a passage in the book of James. Now, James was Jesus' half-brother. He didn't become really a Jesus follower until after Jesus rose from the dead. So he wasn't a part of Jesus' ministry or anything like that. But he comes to faith and he starts following and preaching the gospel and writing letters to the church. And so before I read you this passage, I'll give you a little bit of background on what's going on here. So right before Jesus left and ascended back into heaven, this is Matthew 28, which we just covered this passage a couple weeks ago. But Jesus says to go and make disciples of all nations. In fact, if you skip from Matthew 28 and go to the first chapter of Acts, Jesus is giving these instructions, and he's saying, I want you to go into Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. He basically he's saying, start in your own hometown, then your county, then your state, then your nation, then your whole world. Go into all of the world. And that was a big task, and it was really difficult. And on top of that difficulty, because the gospel had to break out of just where Jesus was, it had to break into the whole world because Jesus wanted to change the world. And so that required people to leave. But what makes this, again, even more hard is that then there was this great oppression that started to happen, is that the Christians were getting persecuted. Some of them were even losing their lives because of their belief in Jesus, because of this gospel that they were preaching and the good news that they were sharing. Because of this, the church was going through all kinds of changes. It was changing locations. In fact, for a while, the church in Rome was completely displaced because all the Jews were exiled from Rome. So you had a Gentile church, and then when the Jews were let back into Rome, the Jews were used to church, used to following Jesus a certain way, and the Gentiles were like, wait, but there's these things, and why are we concerned about this? And there's all kinds of things that went into that, and a lot of reason for people to divide, a lot of reason for people to not get along, but a lot of changes happening nonetheless. And so you had all these Christians going through all these different changes and all these different tough circumstances. And this is what James says in the very beginning of his letter. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy." Now, if you've been in church for very long, or if you've been a Christian for much of your life, chances are you've heard this verse or something similar. And maybe if you have expressed going through a hard time and somebody meaning well said something along the lines, well, just consider it pure joy when you go through trials of many kinds. And if that happened to you, you might have wanted to slap that person, because when you're going through a hard time, sometimes the last thing you want to hear is, consider it a good thing, right? God has a plan. And when you're in a tough space, that's difficult to hear. And in fact, it's not what you want to hear. You don't want to hear to just think of it as a good thing, or to try to find the silver lining, or to try to find joy in the midst of the situation, because the reality is you're unhappy about the change. You're unhappy about what's going on. You're unhappy about the trial that you're facing. And so this is really difficult. But James says, consider it an opportunity for great joy. And I think this is really important, because this is something that if we shift our mindset, especially before we go through changes, this will help our mindset when we are in the middle of a change, to be able to face it in a strong way and to be able to encounter that change in a way that allows us to come through faithfully. And here's what I mean by that. Because James talks about something else when he continues. He says, "For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let your endurance grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." This is why he says to consider it great joy whenever you face change or trials of any kind, because it develops your endurance. Now, that's an athletic term, right? When we think of endurance, we think of athletics, and we think of, like, especially the Olympics are going on right now, you think about the endurance that these athletes have to have in order to compete at the level that they're competing. How many of you guys have ever run track or soccer or basketball or any sport that requires some kind of physical activity? We're not talking about golf. We're talking about something that you got to run and keep up with things physically, okay? This is tough because if you've been eating a lot of ice cream and Christmas goodies over winter break and then you come back to practice in January, then, well, your side cramps, you hurt, you're in pain, you don't last as long, and you might throw up, right? Talking about unappealing things that are green, like, that might happen to you. And that's because your endurance has gone down over the break, right? Endurance is a good thing because the more you build up your endurance, the more you prepare for it, the more you work on it, the more you practice, the stronger you are whenever you face adversity. Whenever you're in the field, whenever you're on the court, whenever you're around the track, you are able to last longer and complete the race and complete it well because you've built up your endurance. Now, changes and trials in your life create opportunities for you to build your endurance and to build your faith muscles in the one who controls everything. Or working through and understanding that before the trial comes and knowing that all things are working together for God's good, that God has his hand in all things and God has a plan for you, will help you build up that endurance so that when a change or trial comes, you're able to withstand it because you built up that endurance. So these trials can be good because they show God's glory, they show his ability to make an incredibly horrible situation and make good things come out of it, but it also allows you to grow in your own personal faith. This is huge on both of those levels. So that's why James is saying, consider it a great joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because it gives you the opportunity to build your endurance. Now, last week, I gave you the analogy of a spacesuit. How you need spacesuits when you go into the unknowns of space because they protect you and all that kind of stuff. Do you guys know, like, all the different things that astronauts have to do in order to train to go into the unknowns of space? You guys know what they do? Like it's kind of incredible when you think about it. Like, they have to go through a lot of hours in a classroom, just learning all the facts and understanding the concepts and understanding what to do. But then they also have to go through, like, physical training. What is it like in space to, like, walk in zero gravity? What is it like to deal in these situations? They've got to train underwater because there's less gravity down there. They've got to test their endurance. There's tons of stuff that they have to do. They have to go on test flights, and they've got to practice handling equipment and know how to handle all the gear in case an emergency happens while they're in space. They have to know how to fix the issue and handle the equipment. They have to build their knowledge and their endurance physically before they even go out into space so that they can withstand the challenges that are in the unknowns of space. And so, likewise, whenever we face trials, we have to have the endurance and we have to build up the endurance and we have to let those trials build the endurance that it takes to be able to have a strong faith and to allow God to grow our faith. See, the endurance that James wrote about is very similar. When we take a step towards making a change, we're working on building our endurance. So that endurance builds not only in the trial, but in the preparation to the trial or the change. When you take a step towards making a change, we're working on building our endurance. And let me give you some examples. Because essentially what he's saying is practice makes perfect. You've ever heard that phrase before? Like, you're not very good at something and someone's trying to teach you something, and then you start to get the hang of it, and you're like, well, keep working on it because practice makes perfect. Right? when I was learning guitar and my fingers hurt really, really bad because I didn't have calluses yet. And so the strings just was like making my fingers almost bleed, and it hurt, and the fingertips were bruised. And well, practice makes perfect. The more you do it, the more your skin gets these calluses, and then it doesn't hurt anymore. And then you can play better. And so practice, somebody said to me a long time ago, practice makes progress, because you'll never be perfect this side of heaven. I like that phrase a lot. But we all know the phrase, practice makes perfect. And so when it comes to making those changes in our lives, whether it is spending an extra 15 minutes a night studying so that we can do better on the test, so that we can improve our grades, or whether it is prepping mentally and focusing before you go into practice, before you go into the game, so that you can help your team and be there for them, whatever it is, if you make small steps towards change now, you are building your endurance to be able to change the trajectory of your life forever. And trials give you the opportunity for changes, give you the opportunity for that to happen. God can use the unknown to make you stronger. Now, a lot of people conflate two different ideas. When bad things happen, or when change happens, because change can be good or bad, but specifically when bad changes happen in your life, and somebody says it was meant to be, or God planned this, I want to clear up. That's, I think, a misinterpretation and misconception of how God works. Because God doesn't plan for bad things to happen to you, specifically for the purpose of you to grow. But because we live in a sinful world, because God gives us free will, and because bad things happen to everybody, God does promise that in the midst of those bad situations, He will give us the strength to endure it. He will be with us. Now, there's a difference between saying God caused something and saying God will use something. And God doesn't cause bad things to happen to you, because most of the time, bad things happen to you because of some kind of sin in the world. So bad things happen because there's death because of sin. God doesn't cause those things. We chose those things. But God does use any situation to make beauty rise out of the ashes. And if you can trust that, and you can trust that God is good, then He can use whatever situation you are going through or will ever go through in your life to build your faith and to make you stronger. And God can use the unknowns in your life to make you the person that He's called you to be. And that's a huge and powerful truth that can change the way we see life altogether. So first, what I want you to practice doing, to take a step towards change in your life, is to name an area of your life that you want to see changed. You have to think of an area of your life. Most of you thought of it already throughout this talk. Secondly, take one step towards making that change. Whether it is the study habits that you're building, or whether it is finding a new place to sit at lunch to try to make some new friends because you know you need better influences. Or maybe it's just boundaries and you need to put your phone away and set limits on your screen time. Whatever it is, take a step towards that change. Even if it feels difficult, I want you to try. And then lastly, I want you to try again, because you will fail, because it takes practice, and practice will make perfect. Practice will make you better, and God can use those unknowns in your life to make you stronger, especially when you are working with Him instead of against Him, and when you are taking steps towards the change you want to see in your life and relying on God's strength when yours fails. So, as you guys finish out this discussion within your small groups, I want you to think of that one thing. What's one change that you want to make in your life? Think about that. You'll have a chance to talk about it within your small groups now. I'll pray, and you guys will go ahead and start that discussion.